Well, I'm sorry. Really appreciate your remarks, and certainly me personally, but I know a lot of people in this room have been a long-term advocate of a guaranteed annual income. But I want to just do the devil's advocate for a moment, because I'm sure you've heard it all as you've traveled the country. I agree with you that it absolutely is something that we could try here, and as a small population, I think could be successful. However, I'm looking at this as a citizen, and I'm saying, so you're saying that I should subsidize private business that pay minimum wage? How do you find the correlation between a guaranteed annual income, minimum wage? What's the role of business in this? And what kind of comments have you found about that? Because I see that as being, almost an immediate red flag that some will say. And I think it's a real question. So I appreciate your comments on that.
You get there are 2 or 3 red flags that get thrown up of that kind, Audrey. That is one. And the other one is, and it's part of the same mix, right, which is what about the disincentive to work? Why would somebody who can get kind of basically what they need without working ever want to go to work? Well, there are no studies of welfare recipients that indicate that they are much happier on welfare than they would be out in the marketplace working and earning a living wage. Part of what creates that trap is the fact that your first few dollars of earnings, because the minimum wage isn't all that high, produces a level of taxation when you count the benefits that you lose when you're off welfare that is almost 100%. The wealthiest person in Canada doesn't pay 100% on their last, $5 million of income. So part of what we'd have to do with this is to make sure there was a gap between the basic income and what they could earn off the income, which incented them to go into the workplace when they could and when it made sense, or incented them to go to university and still get student financial assistance, which they're not eligible to get under our present welfare rules across the country. So you'd have to have that calibrated, and because the calibration would be different in Yellowknife than it might be in Quebec City, and that is why I think it's important that it be the provinces and the territories that shape the kind of proposition they deal with. And I would bring business to the table. In fact, Senator Eggleton and I are going to meet with John Manley at the Council of Chief Executives to make the case to them that, arguing for lower taxes and free is all good, but if you're not going to actually argue for a stronger economy for everybody, your position is going to be pretty diminished in terms of credibility over time. Coming in to argue for your own parish, not very compelling. And in organizations like the American Roundtable, in industrial organizations in places like the Netherlands and elsewhere, industries take a very strong stand on these kinds of social justice issues because they know it's better for them. So you're right, that's a red flag. But my view is if you have an earnings gap that allows people to go into the workplace and have a tax incentive to do so, you will not, in my judgment, produce a problem for the basic minimum wage. I am not a great advocate, for what it's worth, of massively ramping up the minimum wage, and you and I may disagree on this, because I actually think that the minimum wage is insufficient, even ramped up, to meet some of the problems, and that a basic income floor as a society, which we all contribute to, is a much more rational way of doing it. And when you say to small business and others, your taxes, which are now being kept reasonably high because of cost of health care, cost of prisons, cost of all these other things, are going to moderate because we're going to reduce the feedstock because people are going to have lives. I think you can work that out. And, of course, they'll say, prove it, which is why the Dauphin, Manitoba kind of circumstance is so important. But your question is spot on. Thank you. Nope. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't know if I should stand. I'm just going to sit here for a second. I don't like having my back to the people. But my question was, I found it quite interesting. I really appreciate your comments and what you have to say. But what I found quite interesting was that First Nations and reserves were not mentioned, and I don't know if that was part of your stats. I guess my concern, on some of the reserves, we don't have reserves up here. We do, but
Right.
But our communities do suffer too in ways. We have, housing situations. We have all kinds of things that are going on in our communities. But some of the reserves in northern part of Manitoba, or probably even northern part of Ontario, that are isolated.
Yes.
That the only way you can get into these places are by plane, or if winter roads. Okay. My experience when I was living there and working in these reserves are that there's not enough jobs for everyone. So majority of the people are on SA or social assistance of some kind. Younger people are now probably leaving some of the reserves, moving into the city so that they can get better education and get better jobs. I just find it really interesting that as First Nation people across Canada, that we are the ones that fill the jails. Mm-hmm. We're the ones, our children are the ones that go into care. Our young people are the ones that get into trouble with the law. I find that very interesting. That has not been mentioned, because we are the ones that are probably costing the citizens across Canada a lot of money in one way or another. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but that's my sense. I think it's really important that when we talk about this issue, that we also talk about how, as Canada being a rich country, that we all need to work together. We should not have to be in isolation of one another. We need to ensure that certain things are in place. I'm a counselor for one of the First Nations up here, and one of the things I find quite frustrating at the political level is that constant education of our leaders, not our First Nation leaders, but our leaders that we're constantly talking to about making some improvements, or even respecting our land claims that we have settled up here, is not being expected, and not, there's just, we're always constantly, seems like, banging our head against the wall when we're trying to run a government. We always have a capacity issue within our government, so therefore we always have that lack of funding that comes into it. So not only do we fight with the federal level, we fight with the provincial level, and it's just a constant fight all the time for us. So therefore, our people are in a situation where we like to improve their lives. We want them to become independent. We want them to become self-sufficient, because our ancestors were self-sufficient.